Welcome to the Nehemiah Entrepreneurship Community Podcast. I'm your host, Patrice Gay. And with us today is my good friend, Ford Taylor from Transformation Leadership. Ford, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Patrice. It's always a joy being with you, my friend.
Thanks for being here. Well, I've asked Ford to come. We are continuing our serious discussion around our response to the George Floyd incident, and we are now in part 7 of our series. And so, as all of you know, those who've been listening to us, following us for a while, Nehemiah generated an official response to this incident. As part of that response, we proposed to do 4 things. One was that we'll do a series of podcasts having people from different views to share and dialogue and share their perspective as to what is happening and some proposed solution from their angle. We've had African Americans, we've had whites, we're even going to have police officers come by, and all looking at it from a spiritual and business angle, and of course from a social angle as well. And then we've also proposed that we'll have a series of discussion around a devotional piece we put together called The Journey, to create a redemptive conversation around race relations. We also propose that we will reactivate our urban initiative, and we've partnered with Charles Kears, who will be the director of that, to provide what he's calling the urban impact vision. The idea is to be intentional about serving urban entrepreneurs, both supporting and creating jobs in the urban community. And then lastly, we also will commit to partner with urban leaders in order to provide strategic collaborative solution around urban entrepreneurship and economics. With that, we have I had Oz yesterday, and they're good friends. It's all a family. We have Ford Taylor today from Transformational Leadership. Let me tell you a bit about Ford Taylor. Ford Taylor is a leadership solutions trainer, strategist, and speaker with a primary emphasis on the people that serve an organization while simultaneously maintaining a clear focus on the business or organization itself. Ford shares straightforward practice solutions through authentic leadership training and individualized leadership consulting, with an emphasis on intelligence derived from decades of experience with an area of people, personality, companies, both large and small. Ford helps to both define and navigate leadership in the business culture of today. And one of the things we're going to talk about to Ford about is how does this apply to today's dynamic? How does what he does, how can it help in these kind of situations? His training and talks are centered around removing constraints, equipping leaders, and empowering people to become happy, successful, high-performing individuals with healthy relationship, both inside and out. He's done very well as a business owner, built multi-million-dollar companies. He's the founder of FSH Strategy Consultants and Transformational Leadership. He's the author of a book called Relational Leadership and directs a charitable international efforts to provide transformational leadership to emerging countries worldwide. He's married for 39 years to his wife, Sandra, lives in the United States of America, and has 3 amazing daughters named Whitney, Emily, and Quincy. Welcome to the podcast, Ford.
Thank you, Patrice. Thank you very much.
Well, Ford, you are a parent of 3 girls. I'm a parent of 2 girls. Aren't girls just the best?
They are. I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, they're just. I always thought I wanted a son. And when that first girl came out, it was like, I'm done. I'll take all.
Sons are overrated. I tell you, I love my girls. And your girls not only are beautiful, but they've done well for themselves. By the way, how's the family?
They're doing well. One of our daughters is an early adopter of Corona in New York, and we got her home. She's been with us ever since, but they're all doing well now. We're thankful.
Oh, awesome. And I know that one of them recently got married. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the one that got married. So she and her husband have been with us since the middle of March, and because their companies are saying one of them is first of the year and the other one is September will be the first time back, the earliest. So we're really enjoying this time with them, and we're getting to see our other girls a whole lot more too. So I'm not on an airplane all the time. This has really been nice.
Oh my Lord! I tell you, that flying thing is already. I didn't know I was going to be uh, doing well, staying on the ground for a long time. But I tell you, I kind of like it.
I love it. I'm loving it.
Well, Ford, I have you here to talk about this issue of the George Floyd incident. Our friends on Facebook, on YouTube, Twitter, wherever you're listening or watching, feel free to share your comments, ask your questions, because it's going to be an interactive discussion. Ford, you know what happened. What is your thought about this George Floyd incident, and how do you feel about the way the nation is responding?
Well, I've cried a lot of tears watching our nation respond. And I mean, how can you not cry tears when you watch a man with his knee on someone's back or their neck to their death? It's gut wrenching. It's heart wrenching. It's wrong. Uh, I, I I think the part that I'm not so happy with is that, you know, these movements that are doing the riots, the protests, so many of them are so peaceful. I mean, they're doing the right thing. They're saying, they're screaming, "Hear me, hear my pain. Please just listen to my pain. Help me with my pain." Yet what we're seeing on the media is that very, very small percentage who are looting and really doing the wrong thing. And so my heart breaks that the media won't show all of our great African American and white people that are out saying, "Hear my pain," and they're peaceful, but they're saying this has got to be this has got to be changed. It's got to be solved, and I agree with them. And so I would say to the media, please show the good people. There's a lot of them, and stop showing that small percentage who are doing the looting and the fires. I would ask them to quit doing that. Uh, but
Mm.
but it's heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting as you talked about the fact that it is whites and black out there who are participating in the marches. I think back 29 years ago, the Rodney King incident, and how that was not the case, and 29 years later, how this is almost like civil rights all over again in terms of how it was whites and black as well then. What do you think is different this time? What's so different about this incident than what happened 29 years ago in terms of the rallying crowd of both whites and blacks, and that is taken on it's taken on the face it's taken.
Right. Well, I think a couple of things. You know, Patrice, we had this happen in the early 2000s in Cincinnati, Ohio, when the young man died from, you know, when he was being arrested in the White Castles there. So we had to deal with this right there in our own city, and it actually helped us drive our leaders to the table to have the conversations. And I think what's happened since Rodney King is that more and more people have said, you know, what if I'm wrong? You know, as you know, Patrice, one of the things I teach is
Oh,
let's stay at the
sorry, Ford's
uh, I'm I'm not sure if it's me gone or you gone, but one of the things I've taught leaders is learn to stay at the table, learn to have the conversations, even if the conversations are painful. Okay, it looks like that it's Patrice that may be gone. And so I think what's happened since Rodney King is more and more people's eyes are being opened to what really is going on in our country. And I think more relationships have been built. I think some of the younger generations have seen things that are different than what some of the older generation has seen. And I think by them stepping into this and the older generations being willing to learn from the mistakes we made, I think that makes it different. I think we can stand together in ways that maybe we couldn't stand together back then because of so much, whether you racism, unconscious bias, ignorance, uh, the truth not being spoken. I mean, pick the term, but it seems like that we've I mean, Patrice, think about what you do. Think about what we've done together over the years. And it's always been about how do we drive unity among the races, among the denominations? How do we get the business and the church to work together, the government's education system? And so I think there's been a movement swelling that's allowed this to happen where we can go out and stand together on these issues that are real.
Good, good. Ford, you had a chance to read our response. What are your thoughts about Nehemiah's official response?
Well, I just gave a little bit of it because, I mean, that's what you do. I mean, you are a unifier. You are a completer. You're not a competitor. You truly believe, and I'm with you, that in your heart of hearts, this country can be a great country. And so you're doing the things that says, let's go after the real issues. We have some systemic issues in our country. Let's go to the table and let's talk about the systemic issues. And Patrice, you're saying, and I'm with you, let's be a part of the solution. Let's not be a part of the problem. And I think what your response is saying, I want to be a part of the solution and not enter the problem. And I love it.
What I appreciate about your take, and we're going to get into some of the tools that you share in transformational leadership and how it can be a resource for individuals as we go through this. Again, friends, if you have questions for Ford or comments, please shoot them out. We'll go ahead and bring it out. What I appreciate about your approach, Ford, is that you very empathetic and recognize the problem. And as a white person, that makes Black really feel as though you don't only care, but feel touched by it. And I think that helps in the process. But let me ask you, there are some Blacks who feel as though not all whites are able to feel that, or they don't sense that from them. So what do you think it is? Why are some able to project empathy while others struggle with empathy, even when they really care?
Well, I think a lot of most of our issues is pride. I mean, that's most of us. That's what we deal with is we have this line in the sand that we have a need to be right. And what happens is, and I learned this the hard way, I mean, the real hard way, Patrice, is, I would say something that I did not know was painful to my Black brothers and sisters. I didn't know that. Okay. And so I would say things that sounded exactly like someone that's intentionally a racist, and they're intentionally trying to hold people down that don't look like them, hold people down because of the color of their skin. They're out there. And then there's those of us that we sound just like that, but we don't even know those words are painful. And it was a hard learning curve for me to go to my African American brothers and say, teach me, tell me when I do those things. And I can't tell you how many times when they told me, I was stunned that comment could feel that way, but I didn't defend it. All I said was, thank you for sharing that. Those words will never come out of my mouth again. And so if we could take the posture that I can hear your pain, I can't fully empathize with it because I'm not Black, but I got news for you. I can at some level understand it because of what the leaders have taught me. I mean, when I go into a restaurant now and I have my Black friends and the waiter looks at me and says to take my order, I'll say, would you take my friend's orders first? And then they'll look at me after they walk off and go, thank you for noticing. Well, we don't notice things like that because of our systemic nature. It's not that we don't care. We just don't know. We don't notice. Now, there are those that do know and don't care, but I don't think that's necessarily the majority. And so we don't know how to take that pain on and just listen without having to either react and defend ourselves or try to come up with a quick fix. But it took a lot of time to get here. It may take a little while to undo it.
Yeah. Let me flip it, and we'll get into the tools in a minute. So there are some whites who feel that some Blacks are oversensitive, and they feel that, even as you just pointed out, even when they realize that, they still have a hard time, giving them a break or allowing them to proceed. What do you say to those Black, as a white person, given that you teach transformational leadership, you help leaders become better, overcome constraint? what do you say to those blacks, as they may they may not realize themselves that they make it difficult for whites to open up and to be willing to do what you just did. What can they do to be more approachable, more understanding, and allow that dialogue on there? Because it's a two-way street here.
Well, because of the systemic nature of this, in other words, because we've been in this for so long, and we have so much systemic, accidental, unconscious racism bias, and we have intentional, and because it looks the same, if you're black, take a moment, take the chance on a white person that if you gently shared your pain in a gentle way, may I share something with you? Can I tell you something that happened to me that makes me feel this way? Can I share something with you that someone of your color did, or colored number of things that's happened in my life? Because so many people, and this isn't just black and white, they can't distinguish the difference between anger and passion. And so when you share that story with passion and they hear anger, it's very difficult for their brains and their hearts to stay big. But if you can do it with gentleness, so they don't hear anger, even though it's probably passion, until they learn that it's passion, then you can let me have it, because I want to hear it and I want to hear your passion, because I'm now passionate with you.
Wow. That is good stuff. I want to read in a text that I got yesterday. After one of our listeners listened to one of the podcasts. I won't put names in, but I want to read it because the podcast I heard was a white guest, and this is an African American gentleman responding, and I want you to respond to it. And I don't want to put you in the spot here for it, but I want to read it to another white person so that you can hear what he thought and see whether or not what you respond to it. He says, "Hey man, I just watched this particular podcast, and this dude was so far off base." And then here's what he said. He said, Barack Obama's presidency created a false narrative. This is the African Americans sharing, that white folks especially like to run with. This idea that we have finally entered into post-racial side here in the United States. I totally understand the spiritual struggle, but no one wants to attest to the systematic racism, which are the underpinning of this society here in the States. Today's episode did a disservice to the reality that so many African Americans are facing in the country. Yes, Jesus is the answer, but as black and brown people, we need to make sure that more God-fearing brothers like George Floyd don't die at the hands of the authorities the way that he did and get away with it. And then he went on to say, and then so I said, okay, I invited the podcast to talk about it. Hopefully he'll take me in there, if I think he will. And then I said, and he said, as a believer, we have to know that with God, all things are possible, including eradicating racism. But to act as if something that has been around since Reconstruction and beyond that, obviously. But let's just start here. I believe the systematic nature of race is important to understand before we throw it into the sea of forgetfulness, which is what it feels like a lot of white Christians want African Americans to do. So let's talk about it. And so obviously the guests did not mean, did not to project any racist position or posture, but it's a good conversation to have. So as a white person, Ford, what do you think about this guy's text as an African American?
Okay. Well, let me go back just one thing. When I gave the counsel of being gentle and not show so much passion, I would give that to a white person too. So that's not because you're black. That's because people struggle hearing passion if they think it's anger. And so that's just that I was asked to give the instruction. When I hear that text, my heart bleeds. there's so many facts that are never talked about. And again, if we had about 3 days on this podcast to unfold all the research and really talk about it, the research that the media is not going to share. But if you're white and you can't acknowledge that racism has been in the foundation of our country, if you can't say that slavery was as racist as you can be, that's holding a country down. If you can't acknowledge that so much of what's going on in our African American community around finances, around fatherlessness, those things that we make excuses and we point the finger over there, if you can't acknowledge that we put those things in motion. I mean, we took families. I want you to hear this. We took families and we separated families and we put them on 2 different plantations. We took young ladies and wives and we bred children to make money off of by separating the husband and the wife. And then one day, I want you to hear this, in one day, a war ended. And we were told, they were told, you're free. What's freedom? Hey, in our country, we have family values. It's one man and one woman. Well, when did that start? And here's some money. Well, what's money? I mean, if you can't see the pain and you can't acknowledge that it started back then and that we have this thing that's continued. Now, some of it continues because of lies, but that's some of it. Some of it continues because it's true and it's real. So yeah, my heart aches, Patrice, that we can't stay at the table and hear this man's view and just ask him, could you share with me more how you feel about that, and not get offended and not step back.
I tell you, we're going to get into these tools that Ford has that hopefully will help somebody who's listening. Ford, I'm not dragging you again on the tools. I'm going to get to it, but I do have another question for you. Did you hear the interview between Rush Limbaugh and the Breakfast Club?
I did not.
Okay. Now, I'm not a Rush guy, nor am I a Breakfast Club's guy, right? Because they're both inflame a lot of energy. That's I've got enough excitement in my own life. However, I did see it on YouTube because I thought it was interesting. It was so down. Do you even know what the Breakfast Club is?
I do not.
Okay. The Breakfast Club is a very pro-Black radio talk show. I think one of the most popular in the country, from what I understand. That very forward about Black rights and very popular among the stars, and some would say a very left-leaning, if you want to look political term, kind of talk show. And of course, you know who Rush Limbaugh is. So Rush came as a guest on the Breakfast Club. And I thought, wow, something I never thought I would see, but I so appreciated it. Because these were two groups that are so opposite politically and have so opposite views of America come together to dialogue. Interesting dialogue. Now, they didn't get a whole lot, they didn't get very far, but they were able to kind of go back and forth with each other. And I had a huge respect for Rush after that day, because for him to go there and allow that dialogue to take place with lots of humility, I thought it just showed the kind of man he is. So that was very good. So, but that's the kind of dialogue we need to have, right? If we don't come together as Americans and hear each other talk, we don't have to agree. At the end of the program, the 30-minute program, at the end of it, they probably were more disagreeable as they were coming in, but at least they had the dialogue. What do you think about that?
Well, I got to tell you, this group called the City Servants in Cincinnati, that's what we did. We came to the table, and we'll get to the tools later, but we came to the table and we made a commitment. We will stay at this table. You can say whatever you want. And when the meeting is over, we don't have to agree. but you can say what you want and we will stay committed. Well, as people did that, guess what? Because they stayed at the table, they got to know each other. They got to learn each other's hearts. And light bulbs from all sides of the table started coming on. Oh my, I never knew that. I've never heard that before. I never knew that one either. And then all of a sudden we started learning, wow, I've got these biases on both sides
That's right.
that I didn't even know existed. I had no, Patrice, I would go to these African American leaders early on, and I would say, what would it take for me to get you to trust me? And I'm telling you, they would say to me, it's not your fault. You're white. I can't trust you. I will never trust you. Well, what would it take? There's nothing you can do. Would you let me die trying? Would you let me give it my best shot? But you'll have to teach me. If you're not willing to teach me, I can't die trying. And boy, did they start teaching me. And boy, did my eyeballs pop open at my completely unconscious, so deep, no clue of the biases that existed in me.
Wow. For some might say, but Ford, you're putting the burden on white people. Is that fair? Is that right?
No, it needs to be on both, okay? Because it's going to take both. Now, I do believe it, again, part of it is what's your definition of racism, right?
Mm.
And so I'm going to answer this question through this definition. And so if you don't agree with this definition, you probably won't agree with my answer, okay? Because you can come up with definitions. But to me, racism is when one people hold another people down. So in America, we're going to say Caucasians, white people holding down Black African Americans. Okay. And I believe racism is when you intentionally do that. Now, I believe that you can be biased and not racist. But for me, racism means that whoever has the upper hand, that's just my definition, is the one that can be racist. That's just my definition. So who can fix it? Well, that means that those that look like me, we have to speak up. We're the ones that can fix it. Patrice, when I speak on this issue, even in other countries, because sometimes in America we're a little bit arrogant. We're the only one that have these problems. But as you know, these problems exist all over. I'll have white leaders here in America and in other countries come up to me and say, if I said the things you said from the platform, I would get run out of my state or out of my country. And I tell them, you would not get run out if the people that you're speaking to really believed that you loved them. Mm. If they truly believe you cared more about them than your opinion, they would not run you out of town.
Wow. Wow. Obviously, it's funny. We've had two guests that have had two different definitions of racism. And now you brought your own, which agrees with one of the guests. And so now we're 2 for 1 in terms of the definition. For whatever, if it matters any, you and another Black guest were on agreement on what racism is. So we'll see what happens by the time we're done with the series, which definition ends up within the day.
Well, and I might not disagree with the other guys, whoever it is, definition. I might not disagree with that. And so, but when you answer the questions, it's important that we answer them through the lens of whatever that definition is. Patrice, could I tell a story? Would you mind on one of the things I learned?
Go for it.
Okay. So in Cincinnati, a lady asked me to be on her radio show, and she didn't show up. She called in for the radio. This is years ago, and she lit me up. It was a Black radio show. I mean, she lit me up. And when the show was over, the management team came in and apologized for how she treated me. Well, later I would see her and she would not be nice to me. And I was okay with a Believer, Christian radio station. And we would interact, but she was rude. And I'm okay. What have I done? But that's okay. Then one day we got a phone call that her radio station, the owner of the building, gave her 1 day to move out of her building. Now, this woman's a loving, passionate woman, but some people might have seen her as angry, and sometimes angry. And when I found that out, I called our ministry leader And I said, call her and ask her if she'd like to move into our building. So we sent a team over. She said yes. And we moved her into our building, gave her 2 rooms. The next day she came in and she goes, okay, so what are you going to charge me for this? I said, why would I charge you? These 2 rooms aren't being used. Why would I charge you for empty space? The utilities, right? Big number. No, there's no charge. Stay as long as you want. We don't have any use for these rooms. They're yours. She said, okay, what's your agenda? Why would you do this for me? And I said to her, I said, I don't really have an agenda. I said, you say you're a believer. I say I'm a believer. That makes us brothers and sisters. She goes, after all I've done to you. And I said, we're brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters hurt each other sometimes. That's what family does. And I love you no matter how much you hurt me. And she said, deep down, what do you want? I said, I want to be your friend. And she said, what does that look like? I said, you tell me the ways I hurt you. You teach me. She said, okay, let me give one a shot. I said, okay. And she says, do you know that when you use the word boy and gal, how much that hurts? I said, no. I said, I'm from Texas. We use that all the time. She goes, do you realize that when we were in slavery, that we were called boys and gals? I said, wow, I did know that, but I hadn't realized it. She goes, well, that bothers me. I said, never come out of my mouth again. Thank you for sharing that. What else? And she gave me 2 or 3 things. And at the end, she goes, you're serious. You want to be friends? I said, I do. Now, Patrice, at my 50th birthday party, back when I still had some blonde hair, she was there. Surprise birthday party.
Wow.
And we stand and tell this story together now. And she stood up at that party and said, may I say something? And she was told, of course you can. And she said, I'm going to say something that I didn't think I would ever say to a white person. And I knew I would never say to a white man. And she stood up and she turned to me and she said, Ford Taylor, I love you. Thank you for teaching me to love white people. And you can call me gal anytime you want. Patrice, if all we would do is stay at the table, because I didn't know saying boy and gal was a problem. I grew up in Texas. We got boys, girls, gals. But you know what? I don't call anybody that anymore. And this is over 15 years ago. But I chose to listen. And I can tell you so many of those stories, Patrice, that people loved me enough to tell me when I was doing those things that were painful. And I loved them enough to say, I won't do it anymore. Because I know that we have had racism in our country. When I go out and speak now, Patrice, sometimes I got this award from my high school, and they brought in 150 Black students to listen to my talk. And at the end of it, I'm saying this because I want people to hear it. This isn't about me. This is about a solution. And at the end of my talk, the superintendent and the principal came up and said, what just happened? We've never seen 150 high school students stay off their phones and lean into a talk. And I said, well, let me tell you what happened. When I stood up, I said, look, you see my picture on the wall over there? You see that distinguished student? Let me tell you part of why that happened. Part of it is because I'm 6'3". I have blonde hair and blue eyes. And when I went to school here, I was president of the student body because it was a mainly white school. And I was president of our class, and one of my best friends that I did discipleship leadership with in our church, we double dated. We hung out together. I went to his parties. He went to mine. He was black man. He was a black young man. And we were best friends. This was not a best friend that I just played sports with. We hung out. We did things together. And you know what breaks my heart? Is that when we were juniors, I was president of the class and he was vice president. And when we were seniors, he wanted to run for president. And he asked me, can I run for president? And you run for vice president? And I told him no. Patrice, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have said, absolutely, we can be a part of the solution. But out of that ignorance, I didn't know. But if we can learn to hear and listen to one another, it's amazing what we could accomplish as friends. And those students engaged because they were listening to a man who understood the advantage he had. And I told them, guys, after I left the business world, I made a definitive decision not to deny that advantage. I'm not going to deny that it's there, but I'm going to go use it. And I'm going to use that advantage in a way that it makes a difference in people's lives, that it makes a difference in cities and countries. So if you will, join me in making a difference. But I don't deny it, but I do embrace it. It doesn't make it right, but because it's there, I can use it.
I love it. Wow, good to see you, BB, and Pastor Allen. Thanks for being here, and many others who we don't see you. Thanks for being here. If you have comments or questions, you can feel free to ask. Ford, I did a devotional piece called "Embrace Your Privilege." And that devotional piece was really saying exactly what you just said, and it's heartfelt to hear it. Is that don't reject your privilege, but rather embrace it, but use it for good. Because with privilege comes responsibility, right? That's the key. With privilege comes responsibility. Let's get to the tools. There's so much, my friend, that we can talk about here, but let's get to the tools. Guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, I really want you to share it with others because we have to have dialogue. We need to hear from different perspectives. We need to really deal with the root of the issue rather than allowing the media drive our emotions and separate us even more so. For you to a course called Transformational Leadership. First, tell them a bit about what that course is, and I want you to just pull from a few principles of that course that you believe our listeners can benefit, can use at this moment as they're trying to grapple with what's going on around the country. Obviously, you are a product of that very course because you model it. But what is it, and what's one or two things out of that course that can benefit our listeners as they're trying to address this issue themselves?
Yeah. Well, Patrice, let me give you a little background on it. As you know, we took over a company, my wife and I, that was going into bankruptcy when I was 25 years old, and we were blessed that company became successful. And I won't go into details, but 16 years later, I found myself as the CEO of this publicly traded company that was the largest in the decorated sportswear apparel industry in America. I never intended for that to happen. Well, in that travel, as you know, I did things against my wife that I swore I would never do. And when I shared those things with her, believing she was going to leave me, she forgave me. And so for the first time, I think I looked into the eye of what unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness felt like. But I left that and started something else, and it didn't help the travel, and it was very successful. But I laid that down and started a movement, a ministry in Cincinnati called Transformation Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky. Co-started that with an African-American friend. His name was John Stevenson. But when I was doing that, I was doing business consulting on the side. So I was doing business consulting for income, and then I was doing this ministry work as a passion of my heart. And one day, one of my clients called me in his room, in his office when I was there consulting with him. And he said, Ford, you've grown companies huge. You've consulted with a lot of companies, and it's been pretty successful. He pointed out the success in his company. And he said, this success that we're having, how often do you get these kinds of results? And I looked at him and I squeamishly said, every time. And he said, then I want to challenge you. Why are you not using these tools to do your city reaching? Now, this is back before I had gone public with my bad behavior. My wife later gave me permission to do that, to be able to help people. But my response to him was, if the leaders in this city really knew who I was, they wouldn't follow me. Anyway, so he pushed me to bring 30 people into a room, and we gave them all a legal pad and a pen. And for about 6 days, over 6 months, I just did a leadership brain dump. And at the end, they said, this is the most amazing thing we've been through. Do it again. So we did it 3 or 4 times. Someone came around. They said, hey, how would you like to have some help putting together a manual and a PowerPoint so people don't have to write so much? Well, over that time, this became this thing called transformational leadership. And what I found out is all those tools that I had been teaching in companies, all the stuff I used to grow that huge successful company, I realized that if I would use those same tools in my marriage and in my parenting, And I started offering those tools to this group called the City Servants in Cincinnati. I actually took the tools to my pastor and 3 other pastors, and I asked them, by any chance, is any of this in the Bible? And my pastor brought it back, and he said, you have no idea what you have here. And he wanted to know why I asked the question. I said, because it works everywhere, and I'm not that smart. And he said, you have no idea. And he goes, I said, so it's in the Bible? He said, oh, yeah. I said, where? He said, go find it yourself. 3 other pastors came back, and one represented them and said, we don't find this biblical. They came back a few weeks later and apologized and said, we've just never seen the Bible presented this way. So I want to precurse with, on your question, that this training came about from a lot of mistakes that I made. It came about from a lot of successes I had. But what I didn't know is how many of those successes came about because there was a biblical kingdom foundation underneath what I was using. I thought I was God's gift to business, which is what makes you prideful, which is what makes you fall in your marriage. But I realized that these principles worked about everywhere. Well, everywhere that I've seen, except with people that are narcissistic or, mentally ill. And so the City Servants, some people asked them to come to the training and they didn't want to, but one of them asked me to teach his church. And it was an African-American church. And he went back to the City Servants. He said, guys, we all got to go do this. But some of the basic tools that I think have made a difference in families, businesses, now there's one prime minister who went on national television and said, this is what we're going to use to transform our nation. And it's because it is those biblical concepts. But one of them is how to resolve conflict. And so you put a conflict resolution tool in place on the City Servant team. And this is a citywide group of leaders of different colors, denominations, business people, police department, believe it or not, around the table. And you agree, here's how we're going to treat one another. And then you make an agreement. What are we going to do if any of us don't treat each other this way? And it's a real simple process. I mean, we're speaking to believers here. That you go one-on-one. If that doesn't work, you bring 1 or 2 other people with you to bear witness that you had the meeting. If that doesn't work, you have a third meeting and you judge it. And if the person that did it can apologize, they stay. And if they can't, they leave. Well, so what happens is once you put that into place, you start, because what Jesus says next, a lot of people miss, Patrice. He says pagan or tax collector, but what he says after that, for what is bound on earth will be bound in heaven, loosened will be loosened. He says, and I also tell you this, when 2 or 3 are gathered in agreement and I'm in your midst, the Heavenly Father will hear your prayer. So think about that. If we really are in conflict, if we could walk it out the way the Bible says, if we do that, we loosen love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, gentleness, humility, power, honor, glory, authority. And we bind bitterness, racism, anger. We bind those things. But if we don't do it that way, guess what? We loosen resentment, anger, bitterness, rejection, resentment, racism, hatred, poverty. In other words, we loosen the negative, the evil, and we bind the good. And so that's a big one. And I'm told often in Cincinnati, that was the game changer for us. Because what happens is one of the things we agree to is we don't gossip. And gossip's a big issue. I believe if we could learn to stop gossiping and learn not to be offended, we could change our nation in about 48 hours. Because, Patrice, if people could understand conflict is not bad. Unresolved conflict is bad. Conflict plus resolution leads to unity, engagement, and productivity. In a company, that's profitability. In a marriage, it's intimacy. In friendship, it's a deeper level of friendship. In a city, when you resolve conflict and you get those different groups of different colors, different denominations, different spheres of influence, working together towards common goals of solving problems, not arguing over what caused the problem. Now, you may have to do that for a while too, because we're going to stay at the table. All of a sudden, things start shifting.
Wow, that is incredible. Let's look at an application. When you look at when Rodney King, 29 years ago, we had the police situation. 29 29 years later, we have a police situation. And in between, we've had several. How would you, if a police department calls you right now, Ford, and say, you know what, Mr. Ford, Donald Trump called you, Mr. Ford, we've heard about you and you got this magic portion that you do, heal our nation. And they gave you a particular police department, a mayor called you and said, would you fix this? What would you do to minimize or eradicate this so that our police no longer have their hands bloody in these kind of situations?
Well, can I go back to 2000, early 2000s when this did happen in our city and tell you what I would do? Would that be okay?
That's fair.
Okay. Well, the first thing that I did is I went to the funeral of this young man. And as I went to view his body, I went and got on my knees in front of his mother and his grandmother. And I said, on behalf of the white people that have allowed me to represent them, we don't have any idea how to help. I'm so sorry that we're so disunified, even in our church, that we can't come together and help with this situation, and we're wrong. I'm so sorry. Could you find a place in your heart to forgive us and help us come up with a solution? And if you ever see me do anything like this to someone that's Black, would you hold me accountable? And they wept and we hugged. And then I went and I took one of our leading Black pastors and I asked him to come to a meeting with me with the mayor. And I sat with he and the mayor and I said to them, I said, after a long conversation, I said, we're going to do a public repentance ceremony down on the square. And the family has agreed to come and many churches are coming. And I asked the mayor, you said something about this young man. You called him a 400-pound weapon in the newspaper. Is there any chance that you might come and repent to that family for what you called their son in the newspaper? And he said, I can't do that. My legal people wouldn't let me. I said, that's okay. I said, let me ask you both a question. I said, and I looked at the Black guy. I said, now, you don't have to think I agree with what I'm about to say. It's just a question. Is there any chance that you might just admit that it's not quite as bad as you think it is? And I looked at the mayor and I said, is there any chance you could admit that it's worse than you think it is? I said, because if you two could admit that right here in the room, guess what? We might could pull leaders together to stay around the table. And we might could put a plan together to make a change in our city. If both of you would move 1/8 of an inch towards each other. And I said, who knows? It took a long time to get here. It might take 50 years to pull out of it. I got news for you. If you'd come together and we brought the right leaders in the room, this might be something we could put a plan together in 10 years. This could be gone. I said, if God showed up, who knows, in 3 to 5 years, we might solve the problem in our city. And Patrice, they both said no, both of them, that they couldn't come towards each other. Well, we went and we did the repentance ceremony, and I looked around behind some music equipment, and there stood the mayor. And I went over to him. I said, I thought you weren't coming today. He goes, well, I wanted to see what was going on. I said, would you like to say something? And he said, yes. And he came and took the microphone and he turned to that family and he repented publicly to what he said. The next week was his State of the City address, and he invited the family and me to be a part of 1,100 people that he makes this announcement to. And he publicly repented to the family for what he said. Do you know, Patrice, that neither of those, even though there were tons of media there, neither of those got posted on the media.
Wow.
Neither one of them. And then I called the mayor and I said, how about you get me an appointment with the police chief? I said, how many police officers do you have? And he told me, I said, let me tell you something. If I charged you what I charge companies to do, what I'm about to offer to do, it would cost you between $2 and $3 million. I will gift it to you in the city. It'll be my gift to the city if you would let me take the police officers through this training. If you would let me show them the unconscious bias they have. If you'd let me help the Black people to understand that bias is there. And because the bias is there, if you pull out a water pistol, they're afraid. Just get them to acknowledge I'm afraid. It's not because you're black, it's because you got a gun and you're black. And it's because it's a bias that's there. Would you let me do this? It's a gift. It won't cost you a dime. And if we can do this, it could be a starting point to bringing healing into our city. And what if we brought healing to Cincinnati, Ohio, one of the biggest racist places I'd ever seen at the time? We might impact the nation. And Patrice, they turned that gift down. So that is what I would do. I would go
Wow.
to the police department and I'd ask them to go through this training. And I would ask them to let some of our African American leaders come in the room with them, go through it together, learn from each other, build a unity that they truly could get to know each other's hearts, know each other's pains. And I think we could make a difference in the world.
Ford, if a mayor is listening right now, is that offer still open?
Absolutely.
Hey, you never know when you're watching the Nehemiah Entrepreneurship Community podcast. You might get things like this. Here's the offer, mayors. If you're listening, reach out to Ford Taylor. Ford, how do they?
Patrice, if President Trump's listening, I'll come do this with the Congress and the Senate and the judicial system too. Anyway.
And Lord knows they need it. Nobody needs it more than the Congress right now. I mean, no, here's the deal. You should do it with Trump and Nancy. Have both of them lead the pack. Right. So if you're listening, as a matter of fact, I'm not going to name names, but anybody who's listening who have influence over in Washington, do what you got to do. Forward this podcast to somebody who has influence so that way they can do something. Ford, if they do want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Well, the best way is either go to transformlead.com, okay? Or I'm about to release a new website called FordTaylorTalks.com. It's going to be released in about a week and a half. Patrice, as you know, I've kept my name off of this training for 20 years. This month will be 20 years since I used to journal a lot, that I believe God laid on my heart. I'm going to give you something that I'm going to take global if you'll leave your name off of it. And at some point, I'm going to ask you to put your name on it. It was a lot easier not to put my name on it than it is now to come back and put it on it. But I'm going to have podcasts that'll be on that website, a lot of blogs. I've never done anything like this before. I've never done social media. I've never cared. I still don't care about being known, but I do care about people getting these tools. And so that whole Ford Taylor Talks thing is going to be able to be so we can say talks leadership, talks marriage, talks family, talks racism, talks poverty. And we're going to have a lot of guests who have experienced this training, and they're going to share what's happened in their marriages, in their companies. And I'm hoping that the one country that we've done, the parliament and the cabinet, and we were supposed to continue helping that particular country. It's one of your favorite countries too, Patrice. But because of the pandemic, that's been slowed down. But yeah, I'm hoping one day to even get some of them on. We'll have to have a translator to talk about that. What would happen if we had a playbook on how to stay at the table and build relationships?
Wow.
And we look for solutions, and we became part of the solution, not part of the problem.
That is incredible. Wow. Thanks so much, Ford. Now, Ford, as we wrap up here, thank you for your time. Are you still hopeful, Ford? Why and why not?
Patrice, let me answer that this way. I don't know how much time we have. I'm going to try to do this quickly. This is what I try to get my white friends to hear. If you could imagine with me that we're all in 4 different boats and we're out deep sea fishing, and a storm blows in, and all of our boats are now at risk, which means our very lives are at risk. And if we look over and one boat starts sinking, what happens? Are we going to go help that boat? Are we going to throw them our life preservers, or are we going to let them sink? Because all 4 of those boats, all of the lives matter on those 4 boats. But that one that's sinking right now, in this moment, today, that's the life that matters the most. Because if we don't throw the life jacket to that boat, and then another one sinks, and then another one sinks, and there's only one boat left, and it starts sinking, there's no one to save that boat. And so, Patrice, I believe that's where our country is right now. I believe we are in a place that our country could be sinking. And if we don't throw some life vest out to some of those people that are sinking because their life matters, there won't be anybody to throw us a life vest if we start sinking. So on one hand, we could be sinking, and nobody wants to hear that. No one wants to hear that scenario. On the other hand, I'm hopeful that because light bulbs are coming on, that just maybe we can come together, Patrice, like you and I did years ago and started having this conversation, and others can have it at an accelerated rate, and just maybe God will show up and we'll start throwing out some life vests, and just maybe we won't sink.
Wow. Well, there's no better place to close than there. Ford, if they want to get in touch with you, to connect with you, please give them the information again.
Okay, you can go to transformlead.com, or you can go to, again, a week and a half from now, FordTaylorTalks.com.
Wow, what an incredible engage with Ford Connect. Ford, I know you have a class happening right now with Oz Hillman. Can they still get into that class?
You know what? That's one we need to ask Oz, because he's the one that's handling all that. But I don't know how to tell him right now how to sign up for that one.
Well, reach out to Ford and he'll direct you.
Yeah, but if you want to get into one of those classes, if you go to transformlead.com, we have virtual classes that we have people that lead they can get you in one of those virtual classes for sure.
Awesome. Hey, if you've enjoyed this podcast, share it with others. We are trying to start a counter movement of positive, solution-oriented, cross-racial, cross-cultural conversation, so that we are not defined by what the media is saying, but defined by what we're saying to each other. So that the America that we know and experience is the America that we project, and not react to what's going on in the media. Thank you so much, my friend. This actually was better than I thought, as always. Thank you so much.
I love you dearly. Thank you for all you do.
Love you so much. Well, as we prepare to wrap up here, listen, we also have a tool called the Journey to Freedom. And that tool is a tool to allow for redemptive conversation on race that begins with the dream, then goes into the betrayal, and then goes into the struggle, and then goes into the rise to greatness, and then goes into forgiveness, and then destiny, and then close with legacy. And that allows for us to start with a dream. What's the ideal scenario? What's the America that we all like to experience? And then conclude with legacy. What kind of America or world do we want to leave our children? Let's have those redemptive conversations, so that at the end of the day, we don't point fingers at each other, but we take responsibility together to say we will transform our city, our community, and our world. If it's to be, it's definitely up to us. With that said, listen, we're going to unveil, during Nehemiah Week this year, we're going to unveil our urban initiative, and we're going to talk about what we're going to continue to do. When the media start talking about this, we will continue, not by talking, but by doing. So come to Nehemiah Week and come hear what we're doing to mobilize and train urban entrepreneurs, not only around in this country, but also around the world. And you're going to get a video right after this that will tell you more about how to plug in. If you want to be a part of that, visit our website, NehemiahEntrepreneurshipCommunity.com. I'm sorry, NehemiahEcommunity.com, or you can go directly to NehemiahWeek.com. And there you can plug in. If you register before June 30th, you'll be able to get a 50% discount of your registration. With that said, let me leave you with this. May the Lord bless you. And may the Lord enable you to steward those gifts and skills that you have on the inside of you. And be so faithful at it, so that one day you can hear those wonderful words. Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. Now he'll make you rule over much. God bless you. Ford, thank you again.
Thank you, Patrice.
Nehemiah Week is an annual event designed to equip entrepreneurs and leaders from around the world to inspire and to honor marketplace leaders for their accomplishments and what they're doing to model Christ in the marketplace.
God is doing incredible things at Nehemiah Week. Ladies and gentlemen, God has called us to be a light for him, to be an example for him, to be a model for him, so that as others see us, not hear us, but see us, they can see a model of Christ.
Yeah, each year at Nehemiah Week, we gather the nations.
Our vision is to transform the marketplace with the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, one entrepreneur at a time.
We have learned to do business in a godly way. I'll actually spread this to our church as well.
Through the course of Nehemiah Week includes information around principles of biblical entrepreneurship, so really looking at biblical economics.
What we've learned this week is about training. Our Nehemiah project is about training and then coaching and then accessing capital.
Nehemiah gave me God's vision. Really impacts the way that I see doing business.
Nehemiah Week not only gives birth to new ideas, it connects us with resources and relationships that makes them possible.
But what we want to do is not just affect here in the U.S. We want to take this curriculum all over the world.
Whatever it is, the question is, what impact will this have on others?
It's something that's going to change lives. So I'm ready to use whatever I have for the benefit of the kingdom of God.
I believe that the nations are going to shake because of this week. Biblical entrepreneurship takes a stand to say we are going to be witnesses for Jesus Christ in the marketplace.